Today, I'll give you the 5-step framework that helps you do CMC development with peace of mind. But before we dive in, I need to share something that might sting a little bit. While you were listening to episode number 1, your biggest competitor just moved one step closer to IND filing. They are advancing while you are still figuring out your approach. Now the question is, what are you going to do about it? Let me share a story that perfectly illustrates the smart approach to CMC development. I recently talked to a former investor who started his own biotech. What impressed me the most is that he reached out to me asking for CMC advice from day one. He didn't even secure the funding yet, but he already wanted to have a conversation about CMC development. This is very rare. He said, David, I have a finance background and I don't know anything about CMC development. Yet I need to get a basic understanding of CMC, but I know I'll ultimately need to rely on development experts. A very smart guy. That's brilliant strategic thinking. And business coach Dan Sullivan calls this the who, not how strategy. Instead of trying to master everything yourself, identify who can help you achieve your goals more efficiently. This founder understood 2 critical principles. Start CMC early, and if you don't have the expertise in-house, rely on external experts. Don't try to figure everything out yourself when the stakes are high. So let me give you a breakdown. What do you need to understand personally? I would say the strategic CMC decision making, like what are the high level timelines? What are the critical steps? This is something you need to understand. You need to understand, number 2, the quality by design and process fundamentals, such as a CQA or a critical process parameter or a quality target product profile. These are things you need to understand. I would say you also need to understand the regulatory timeline planning and also how you engage effectively with agencies. And finally, as a CEO, as a founder, you need to be able to evaluate your expert, whether it's a CDMO, whether it's a CRO, whether it's an external consultant. And obviously, your role is to build an excellent team. Where I would say where you would need CMC specialists, especially if you're not from a process development or manufacturing background, is with everything that comes to process development and optimization. Also on the analytical side, because you will have to develop methods and then validate them, I would definitely rely on an expert on that end. And then everything related to manufacturing scale-up and tech transfer. Having done several tech transfers myself in my career, I can tell it's very complicated. And if you don't know what you're doing, I would really advise relying on experts. And finally, the whole authoring of the regulatory documents, because the language is very specific. And I would also suggest that you rely on people who have already done that and they know how to properly structure these documents. But what I would say, you don't need to become a CMC expert, but you need to become strategically smart about CMC development and expert evaluation. And once again, I want to repeat that. Start early and get the right who on your team. So now I want to get very practical and I want to give you a 5-step systematic framework that makes this approach work. Step number 2 is the quality by design foundation. Here's the problem. Many biotechs wait for problems to define a solid quality by design framework. They hope their molecular characteristics will translate into good clinical performance without systematic planning. But here's the solution. Establish your quality target product profile and critical quality attributes before you develop anything. Connect your product characteristics directly to clinical safety and efficacy from day one. How do you do that? Well, schedule a focused 2-hour quality by design workshop. By the way, this was one of the actions I suggest you do in part 1. I hope you did it. If not, you still have a chance to do it now. Ask 3 critical questions. What molecular attributes affect patient safety? What parameters determine therapeutic efficacy, and what characteristics impact manufacturing consistency. Map each quality attribute to specific clinical outcomes. For a map, for instance, for a monoclonal antibody, this could mean linking glycosylation to efficacy. It could also mean that, for instance, aggregation levels are linked to immunogenicity risks and charge variance to potency. What I suggest you achieve in this first step is that you can articulate at least 5 to 7 critical quality attributes and explain why exactly each one matters for patient outcomes. I like what Synergy Pharma says, CQAs, and I quote, and CPPs defined at the outset guide every CMC activity. Don't wait to iterate later. Here's the second step. Your cell line development strategy. The problem I'm seeing is that cell line selection feels like a purely scientific decision or a side project, but it's actually one of your most critical business decisions because poor cell line choices create manufacturing headaches that can't be fixed later. So how do we solve that? Well, secure your biological foundation immediately after the candidate selection. And this is an irreversible step because your choice directly impacts batch consistency and future regulatory comparability requirements. How do you do that? Well, you select, document, and comprehensively bank your cell line right now. You validate the genetic stability, growth characteristics, and productivity. And you create a detailed cell bank characterization covering identity, viability, sterility, and genetic integrity. And here I'd advise you to work with experts to establish proper master and working cell banks. And very important is not only the handling of it, but also the documentation. Document everything according to GMP standards from the very beginning, because trying to retrofit documentation later costs you months and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I suggest that you complete cell line characterization and this package with stability data and a properly documented banking procedure. Let's move on to step number 3, the process development. The problem here is that many companies develop processes that work in the lab, but then fall apart at scale. They optimize for immediate performance, but without building in robustness and scalability. Start developing your process with the end in mind, because at the end of the day, you will have to produce at the clinical scale, and the large scale. So how do we go about that? Well, create a detailed process development strategy early on, which is designed for both current needs and future scale-ups. Build GMP thinking into your process from the very beginning, and it should not be an afterthought. So I suggest that you develop a comprehensive process flow diagram showing every critical step, your control point, your potential failure modes, and identify your critical process parameters in order to establish an acceptable or the acceptable operating ranges. And doing this exercise not only helps you avoid problems, but it helps you also gain process understanding, which is key. Design systematic risk mitigation for each process step. Document raw material specifications in process controls and batch record templates. So how do we measure the success of step number 3? Well, complete the process documentation package that could support GMP manufacturing without major revisions. Step number 4, the analytical development. Here, the problem is that companies develop analytical methods reactively when problems arise or when regulatory agencies ask for additional data. This creates expensive delays and credibility gaps. So I'd suggest that you build your comprehensive testing arsenal early with phase-appropriate qualification and validation. In other words, analytical method development and validation should be tailored to the clinical phase of your drug product. So establish methods for identity, for purity, for potency and stability that can evolve with your program. How do we do that? Well, develop analytical methods for all critical quality attributes with clear specifications and acceptance criteria. Start with qualified methods appropriate for your current phase, but design them for eventual full validation. And initiate early stability studies and forced degradation work. This builds regulatory confidence and supports the long-term product stability planning. Work with analytical experts if you have some of your team or otherwise. That suggests that you reach out to CROs or other analytical experts to map the method development, the timelines, and also the validation requirements. So analytical methods for all CQAs with preliminary validation and data and clear validation roadmaps. This is what I suggest you achieve in this step number 4, because missing analytical details triggers regulatory delays that can add 6 to 12 months or even more to your timeline. And finally, step number 5, manage your risks. You need a risk management system. And here is the problem. Risk management is often poorly executed or underestimated. Though, by the way, it's required from phase 1. Regulatory authorities consistently highlight that deficient risk management is a primary reason for clinical holds and submission rejections. So, how do we solve that? Well, implement a systematic, living risk management process that addresses not just technical risks, but also supply chain vulnerabilities and, for instance, the analytical method limitations. And also, for instance, there might be some regulatory gaps or ways you need to discuss with agencies. But this approach must be documented and reviewed regularly. So keep in mind, it's a living document, especially in early phases, because certain things are not fixed yet. How do you do that? Well, draft a risk register listing all critical development and regulatory risks. For each risk, define specific mitigation measures, assign clear ownership, and establish regular review intervals. Also include change control procedures for managing process or analytical modifications, and document how comparability will be demonstrated for any future changes. Here is what I suggest you achieve in this step number 5. Create a living risk management system with clear mitigation strategies and regular review processes. Because poor or missing risk management is cited by FDA and MEA as a recurring deficiency that leads to clinical holds and expensive delays. So this 5-step systematic framework works consistently. But implementation success depends on having the right tools, templates, and tracking systems. To help you start on the right foot as a biotech founder coming from R&D or from a financial background, I have developed a CMC dashboard that specifically helps you address this implementation challenge. It's a Notion-based system that gives you the complete proven roadmap that successful MAP programs use to reach IND filing in about 10 to 12 months. If you're not familiar with Notion, it's a powerful digital workspace solution that's more flexible than Excel. It's easier to use than MS Project and more collaborative than SharePoint. But actually, it includes all of the 3 different softwares in just one. I've been using it for all kinds of management, project management, task management, the management of my business. It's amazing. It's an amazing tool. So I built this dashboard for you and includes multiple views showing your tasks, your key activities, your timeline, your risk alerts, and most importantly, it's ready to go. You don't have to set up anything, but it's fully customizable to your specific program. And it helps you move from CMC chaos to predictable execution, from timeline anxiety to board confidence, and from regulatory surprises to submission readiness. If you want to learn more about this, use the link down in the show notes, and you will find also a 5-minute walkthrough where you see how it actually looks like. And if you have any questions about it, just reach out. But remember, tools alone don't create success. It's a systematic implementation with the right expert partnership that creates success. So, in conclusion today, let me make this simple. You have two options. Continue uncertain CMC development or adapt a systematic approach that delivers predictable results. While your competitors face delays and stakeholder doubts, you can build trust through consistent milestone achievement, and instead of reacting to problems, you can prevent them. Rather than scrambling under pressure, you can scale smoothly from development to commercialization. By implementing this systematic 5-step approach, you will demonstrate the operational excellence that separates successful biotechs from those that struggle. Even with limited resources, this framework provides the structure needed to navigate the complex CMC landscape efficiently. So, turn CMC from your biggest risk into your strongest asset. Build a system that impresses investors, regulators, and competitors alike. Because great science deserves great execution. It's that simple. Thank you very much for tuning in today. If you like this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcast or the platform you found us on, and I'll see you next time. All right, smart scientists. That's all for today on the Smart Biotech Scientist podcast. Thank you for tuning in and joining us on your journey to bioprocess mastery. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. By doing so, we can empower more scientists like you. For additional bioprocessing tips, visit us at smartbiotechscientist.com. Stay tuned for more inspiring biotech insights in our next episode. Until then, let's continue to smarten up biotech.